In a recent interview with other colleagues, I said that Bolsonaro was a coward for not accepting his defeat in the 2022 elections, for not having asked people, the protesters, to leave the streets, right? These were people who were protesting against the elections, the result of the elections that gave victory to Lula, and ended up invading public buildings and being convicted for attempting a coup in the country. In your opinion, did January 8th happen because of Jair Bolsonaro?
My word, coward, was the wrong word. I shouldn't have used that word. Because I can't call the only man who faced the system a coward.
I regretted the word, not the criticism.
That moment was a crucial one. People were at the gates of the barracks. They were in the streets, believing that something was going to happen.
Yeah, there were a lot of bad people, on that so-called TikTok, all the time. Then they take a picture of President Jair Messias Bolsonaro and put it up. They were using President Jair Messias Bolsonaro to feed the hope that the armed forces would take control of Brazil at that moment.
Bad people, together with good people, but everyone calling themselves Bolsonaro supporters.
Yeah, but calling yourself a Bolsonaro supporter is easy, right?
Minister Flávio Dino determines that the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate must consider no any amendments proposed by party presidents and former parliamentarians. The Supreme Court judge also orders punishment for any violation of this rule. The decision comes amid a federal police investigation against the president of the PL, Valdemar Costa Neto, who, in an interview with Globo News, defended the interference of party leaders in the allocation of resources. Live from Brasília, we're now talking to Márcio Falcão, who has more details for us. Márcio, once again, good afternoon to you.
Hi, Nara. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon, everyone. This federal police investigation started, as you said, after the statement made by the president of the PL here on Globo News, emphasizing and acknowledging that there was interference from party leaders in the earmarking of budget amendments, which are those funds allocated by representatives and senators in the budget for their electoral strongholds. Following Valdemar's statement, there were indications that the former representative and former president of the chamber, Eduardo Cunha from Republicanos, was also making recommendations for parliamentary amendments. Minister Flávio Dino ordered in July the suspension and freezing of 119 million reais from Valdemar and 6 million reais from Eduardo Cunha. Minister Flávio Dino also ordered 21 political parties to explain to the Supreme Court whether there was any internal provision within the parties regarding these parliamentary quotas for party leaders. 19 parties responded to the Supreme Court and said that there was no such provision for the nominations by party presidents. We will now see on the screen excerpts from today's decision by Minister Flávio Dino when he orders the notification of the President of the Chamber of Deputies, Hugo Mota, and the President of the Senate, Davi Alcolumbre, so that they inform the technical departments of Congress that any act, table, document, communication, spreadsheet, official letter or request that intends to attribute to a party, president or a former member of parliament the authorship, ownership or power to nominate regarding a parliamentary amendment must be considered absolutely null and void. According to the minister, these designations or requests cannot serve as a basis for carrying out administrative acts aimed at executing public spending. Therefore, the minister says that these acts cannot be used for the release of funds. Dino also said that any non-compliance should lead to an investigation of disciplinary responsibility, therefore, within the chamber itself, such as by the Ethics Council, without prejudice to criminal and civil liability. Dino also sent this information provided by the 19 parties to the Federal Police, which should reinforce the ongoing investigations against Valdemar and also against Eduardo Cunha. Minister Flávio Dino also gave Podemos and Solidariedade 5 days to state whether or not these quotas exist for party leaders. They did not comply with the previous request made by Minister Flávio Dino. In this decision, the minister emphasizes that if this new 5-day deadline is not met, they may be fined 100,000 reais per day. The president of the PL, Valdemar Costa Neto, told the Supreme Court that he was only making suggestions regarding the amendments and that the parliamentarian could choose whether or not to follow these recommendations. The former congressman Eduardo Cunha denied the allocation of parliamentary amendments.
President Lula stated that no one is above the law and that his eldest son, Fabio Luiz Lula da Silva, known as Lulinha, needs to defend himself. He gave an interview this Sunday to Record, quote, "We are all obliged to act correctly. If someone is acting inappropriately in the wrong way, that person must be investigated. That applies to my son, it applies to anyone. No one is above the law if they make a mistake, end quote, according to what the president said, who also emphasized the independence of the federal police to investigate Lulinha. The president's son was identified as an indirect beneficiary of the actions of a lobbyist, Roberta Loxinger. She worked to find political contacts to facilitate the sale of medication to the federal government. Lula also said, quote, "I am not a president who tries to block investigations. I don't threaten to fire ministers. I don't threaten to punish police chiefs. Investigate. And everyone has the right to prove whether they are innocent or not. If that happens, they will be forgiven." End quote. This is one of the strategies of the PT to highlight the independence of the federal police. Lula said that if someone makes a mistake and if the mistake causes losses to public funds, those people will have to pay. My son knows if he makes a mistake, he will be judged, he will be punished, he will be acquitted. But he has to prove his innocence. That's what President Lula said. It's worth noting that information has been disclosed. In fact, Minister Mendoza this week requested an investigation into the selective leaking of information about the Fabio Luis case. President Lula's son is the one who denies any kind of criminal activity. Ramirez?
Of course, these accusations that have been made against Lula's son have destructive potential for Lula's campaign, right? But unlike other times when Lula's name or a family member was dragged into some scandal, Lula has the advantage today of being in a position where part of the public has become numb, right? After all, Lulinha, Lula's son, has already been accused of being one of the owners of JBS, but it was found out that he wasn't. There was also talk about his involvement in the Lava Jato operation. Lula had also already been accused regarding the Mensalão case. So in some way, part of the public opinion will hardly be affected by this kind of information. Right? Since it's not the first time the PT has been involved in this kind of situation of accusation. So it creates, right, among part of the electorate, this idea that it's just another way to harm President Lula in another run for office. It's different from what happens with Flavio Bolsonaro, right? Because, in fact, audio recordings have surfaced. There is more concrete evidence, right, of direct conversations with Borcaro. So this creates more discomfort, right? But of course, what we start to see during election times are reciprocal attacks, accusations of corruption, especially because the determining factor for the rejection of candidates is exactly their involvement, directly or indirectly, right, with cases of corruption, money laundering, and so on, right? So whether we like it or not, there are people within the federal police who have leaked this information. This needs to be investigated, just as it also happened in the case of Flavio Bolsonaro himself, right? Somehow information from some confidential investigations is being leaked. And this has no other purpose than to harm candidacies, no matter whose. In Lula's case, it's no different.
Professor Paulo Ramirez, thank you for speaking with us this Sunday. Take care. Have a good rest of your Sunday. Thank you.